Nobody cares what the new president's going to do. So, would we not all feel that 2009 was the year that Obama was president? Even though George Bush was president for 20 days during 2009? So do I have to say that George Bush was president from 2001 to 2009 to prove to you how honest and clear I am? Or could I just say 2000 to 2008? Because even numbers are easier to remember. That's what I'm going to do. So George Washington was president of the United States in this class from 1788 to 1796. Not from March 1797 to from March 1789 to March 1797. And so I'm going to allow you to use either date. That you can, if you want to be really smart, say that John Adams was president from 1797 to 1801, or you can be only as smart as I am and say he was president from 1796 to 1800. I'm just going to assume that when a guy gets elected, it's as if he was president that very day, even though in reality he had to wait 5 months. Nowadays they have to wait 2 months. Okay, so let's cover the Adams presidency from 1796 to 1800, then the first term of Thomas Jefferson's presidency from 1800 to 1804. And let's look at the essay question that deals with that. Discuss the presidencies of John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Now, when you do that, I am strongly recommending that you only talk about Jefferson's first successful term. Discuss the unsuccessful presidency of John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson's first successful term in office is the longer version of that question. Because the primary reason that Thomas Jefferson's second term was such a dismal failure, Jefferson being accused of being a failure in his second term and leaving office admitting that he felt he was a failure himself, has to do with the causes of the War of 1812. But Jefferson did not deal very well with the foreign affairs crisis with Great Britain during his second term, a crisis which would continue to fester for 4 years after Jefferson left office in 1808, and then we fight a war with the English. By the time we fought a war with the English, our relationship had been bad with them ever since the Revolution came to an end. In many ways, the War of 1812 is the last battle of the American Revolution, in many ways. All right, so everything that has to do with Jefferson's second term has to do with the causes of the War of 1812, or is it all of that important to talk about, like Aaron Burr and such, which I will mention for a few minutes just for a few laughs because it's interesting. All right, so that's what we're going to do today. All right, excellent. And here are the study guide terms. Does this work? Yeah, what do you know? All right, so John Adams' presidency, but you don't have to explain how he got elected. That's the previous essay question, right? The election of 1796 is part of essay question number 2. So you would not talk about it for the presidency of John Adams, you would just begin with his presidency. What would be the election you would talk about for this essay question? Which presidential election would fit into this? Huh? And what year? 1800, when John Adams lost to Thomas Jefferson. So both guys are involved in that election. That would be the election you would talk about in this essay question. And so you would talk about the XYZ affair with France, the Department of the Navy, the Alien and Sedition Act, then the election of 1800, Thomas Jefferson, his successes in his first term, the goals of administration, and the role that his new Secretary of Treasury, Albert Gallatin, had in those goals. The Louisiana Purchase, which is most important, and the Lewis and Clark expedition has to do with what? What does the Lewis and Clark expedition have to do with what more important event? The Louisiana Purchase. Yeah, so these are a pair. Okay. I just forgot to push that off to the right like I did with this. So you would know the theory of nullification has to do with the election of 1800 and Thomas Jefferson. Just like the goals of the Jefferson administration have to do with his Secretary of Treasury, Albert Gallatin. And the Lewis and Clark expedition has to do with the Louisiana Purchase. That's it for essay question number 3. Because as you might expect, overseas commerce and neutral rights, that sounds like a cause of what? What does that sound like that might be the cause of? One of the causes of the War of 1812. That's right. Okay. So there you go. And now I have done the introductory stuff for the essay question and the study guide, and we'll just sit down over here and start a teaching. Yeah. Okay, John Adams was not only our first president of the Federalist Party, he was our last president of the Federalist Party as well. And he not only won the first multi-party election, the Federalists won the first multi-party election in American history, defeating the Democratic Republicans in 1796, and then never won another election again. Okay. And Adams' 4 years in the White House is the first unsuccessful presidency. I mean, if you serve as president for 4 years and you run for re-election, the people reject you, you could not have had that successful a presidency. If it had been successful, you would get re-elected. And like many of our unsuccessful presidents, it was a series of foreign policy crises and foreign affairs emergencies that ruined his presidency. We have a phrase in the English language. What do we call our relationship with Iran today? Are we at war with Iran? Are we at war with Iran, either unofficially or officially? No. Do we have anything near peaceful relations? No. Are they basically our enemy? But are we at war with them? Yeah. We call that war scare. That's war scare. We are in the many years into a war scare with Iran now, aren't we? And we're all wondering when we could be at war with Iran at any moment. They could attack us, we could attack them. Conditions could continue to deteriorate and have been deteriorating for many years, if not decades. Matter of fact, we've been in a war scare with Iran ever since they blew up 250 of our Marines in Lebanon in 1983. Okay. Have they done things to us since then? We've done things to them since then. We've killed Iranians. I think the United States' hands are not clean in our relationship with Iran, neither are theirs. It's a war scare, a modern war scare. So you can both be at war with more than one country and have war scares with more than one. Other countries would like to have a war scare. Hugo Chavez, the dictator of Venezuela, would love to be engaged in a war scare with the United States, but we won't let him. South America is no longer important in the United States. We don't care one way or another. He can criticize us all he wants. All he gets from us is a yawn, which must be incredibly infuriating. At least when the president of Iran calls us an evil monster or the devil, we get upset. Okay. And during the Adams administration, there were two countries that we were constantly experiencing a war scare, that there might be a scare at any moment. The most powerful country in the world, Great Britain, and the second most powerful country in the world, the Republic of France, soon to be ruled by Emperor Napoleon. But we will, as you might see here, spend a lot of time next week talking about the reasons for our bad relations with England. And the information about the bad relationship with England is, for the purpose of this class, to be put in essay question number 3. The test questions that have to do with our bad relationship with England will have to do with Thomas Jefferson. So, when we're talking about John Adams, it's our bad relationship with France. Okay, I'm going to use, now that I told you that we had a bad relationship under John Adams with both England and France, I'm going to concentrate on our bad relationship with France under President Adams, which never did mature into a war. It was only a war scare. We never did fight a war with France. I almost did. As we're about to find out, the French attacked American ships at sea, sunk them, and killed Americans. Or destroyed our ships. You know, ships don't always sink when they're defeated. They're destroyed. If they're no longer saleable and have big holes in them, being patched up with mattresses, you get the sailors out of there in the rowboats. The ship is effectively destroyed, is it not? Sometimes ships are sunk in shallows, in 20 or 30 feet of water, and even though they're sunk, they're still showing up at the top. Is that a sunk ship? I would say yes. Okay, and the relationship with France. Many American ships were being attacked or seized by the French, who were not respecting the United States as an independent country. We were an independent country, but we were small and weak, and big countries take advantage of and push around small, weak countries. And back then, we were the small, weak country. And England and France were the big dogs on the block pushing us around. What we needed was a trade agreement with the Republic of France. There's been a new government, lots of new governments in France. We need to have an agreement signed on paper, our diplomats and their diplomats. The same kind of trade agreement that we had failed to reach with the English under the Jay's Treaty. Jay's Treaty, which had been agreed to by American negotiators and British negotiators, but then rejected by the American Senate. We're going to try the same thing with the French, and it's going to lead to a very embarrassing experience for the Americans. It's going to show how naive and childlike we are concerning policy and negotiation and foreign affairs as a young, brand new country that actually thinks that countries interact with each other by making promises and agreements and shaking hands. The XYZ affair, which I'll now try to explain very quickly. The book only spends a few sentences on it. It's not the most important event in American history, but it has a punchline. I like punchlines. All right. We sent some relatively high-ranking Americans to France in 1797 to negotiate a trade agreement. When we got to the French port, our negotiators went up to a local French government official, said, "Tell us the names of your trade ministers and where they are in Paris." Please, sir. And the French officer, the French government official said something like, "I hear the buzzing of little bugs, but I am not sure if it is words or anything. I'm hearing the buzzes, but I can't hear the words." I wonder, why am I doing this? What does he want? Is he going to ask for one directly? No. So we thought he wanted to shake our hand. We were looking at him like naive Americans. Not arrogant yet, because we're not great powers. Not arrogant yet, but naive. Boy, are we. And finally, the French guy just puts, "Look, I am asking you for a bribe, or I'm not going to tell you. You need to talk to ministers X, Y, and Z. And if you want their names, give me a big bribe. And I want to tell you right now, because you seem like nice guys. Do you know the bribe the ministers X, Y, and Z are going to want to listen to you? How much money did you bring?" "Well, we didn't bring any. We're just negotiators." "Well, then negotiations are over." And we went home very embarrassed, very angry and frustrated at the way the world really operates. And when American newspapers found out about it, we didn't like it either. We thought the French were pushing us around. Okay. But that's the way it goes if you're trying to negotiate openly with a more powerful nation when you're weak. That's no equality. If you're not equal, you're not going to get equal treatment. And we're not getting equal treatment. Okay. By 1788, there are naval battles being fought with French ships and American ships in the Caribbean, and their ships are a lot bigger than ours. And we're getting defeated. So the only reason we're not at war with France is because they don't feel the need to declare war on us. They can just attack our ships, and we are too weak to declare war on them. We just got to take it. But we have to do some fighting back. So at considerable expense, and using up a lot of his political capital, John Adams decided to add a new department to the American government, the Department of Navy. For over 100 years, the Department of Navy was a separate department outside the Department of War, which basically just was in charge of the Army and domestic issues like Indian wars. Whereas the Department of Navy was the foreign affairs branch of our armed forces. The branch of the armed forces were going out there and interacting with other countries, the Department of Navy. Charles, do you know when we rolled the Department of Navy into the Department of Defense? Did it still exist in World War II, the Department of Navy? It was already rolled in. And in World War II, we didn't have the Air Force yet. It was still the Army Air Corps. But the Air Force didn't come into existence until the Cold War, after World War II. The Department of Navy existed in World War I because Franklin Roosevelt was the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Navy in World War I. So somebody needs to Google that. When did the Department of Navy come to an end? Are you trying? You don't have your internet. You don't have internet access. That's okay. Oh well, don't know the answer to that, but it existed throughout the entire 1800s. And the Department of Navy is today just part of the Department of Defense. Okay. And of course the Air Force didn't get a department. It just became a separate branch in the armed forces. The Air Force Army, Navy, and Marines. We have 4 branches. Most countries in the world only have 3 branches of the armed forces. Most countries' Marines are in the Navy. Okay. All right. And at great expense, we authorized the construction of 40 mid-sized warships. 40 mid-sized warships. I don't usually give you those numbers, but there's a reason for that. First of all, 40 middle-sized warships was far more than we could actually afford. And it wouldn't be too long before Thomas Jefferson cut that way back to like 4. That we could not afford a middle-sized Navy back then. And at 40 middle-sized ships, that was nowhere large enough to compete even with the French, much less the English. The English had a Navy of between 200 and 250 large man-of-war warships with 100 cannons on them each, whereas our mid-sized warships only had 20 or so. And the French had about 100, maybe 125 or so, large warships. If we spent more money than we could afford on our Navy, we did not have the resources to stand up to a great power like England or France, or anything near the resources. Okay. Which is the situation that many countries face even today, small countries. They could not stand up to more powerful countries, even if they spent twice as much money as their country could afford on defense. They still would not have the resources to resist a stronger enemy. Our best example today would be if the Iranians decided the day after we left, pulled every last soldier out of Iraq. If Iran invaded Iraq, which they had every moral, legal reason to do, since the Iraqis were the ones who invaded Iran in the 1980s, it would be understandable revenge. Iraq wouldn't last 6 weeks before it'd be conquered by Iran. Just like that. Especially since Iraq doesn't have an air force anymore. It's probably not going to happen because we would go in immediately. Then we'd be at war with Iran, which seems to be the mini theme of today's class. All the many ways that a lot of you guys are going to end up getting drafted and ending up fighting in Iran, not Afghanistan or Iraq, or any of those countries.
We had a small idea, but couldn't we fight the Barbary pirates?
And who won that war with the Barbary pirates? The United States or the Barbary pirates? The Barbary pirates won that war, which we will talk about in a little while, the next week. So yeah, the Barbary pirates. Well, we lost half our Navy in that war. If you remember, by which I mean 2 ships. And one of them we destroyed ourselves. Remember, they seized the ship, and the captain strapped some gunpowder and a keg to his back, swam to the ship, and blew it up, so that we wouldn't be giving our largest warship to our enemy. Yeah. That's right. That happened in Tripoli. By the way, why that happens to be in the Marine song. We'll get back to that later. You are probably the only other person in the room. Did anyone else ever know about our war with the Barbary pirates, except me and Charles? No one? Very obscure. Very obscure. Little war. One of these little wars we fought, undeclared wars, and we've had a lot of them. That was, I think, our first undeclared war.
Finally overcome. Finally.
The pirates?
Yes.
Oh no, we just started paying them the bribe. Which is why, what started the war, we refused to pay them the bribe. Then we lost, and we paid them the bribe. I'm absolutely certain of that. But then when you were a kid, when you were young, you know, people used to always paper over American history because we've always got to be right. You guys do know what it means to be an apologist? If I'm an apologist for the Republican Party, am I apologizing for what jerks they are? That's not what the word means. What does it mean to be an apologist if it doesn't mean I'm sorry?
Explain.
Explaining away bad things by saying they had to be done, you couldn't have done anything else, it was always the right thing today, your country right or wrong, no matter what we do, is always right because we are the greatest country on earth, and even when we make mistakes, you just have to accept it because we're so great. Now that's being an apologist, if there ever was one. Of course, you won't see much Texas apologists from me. I'm from California. And you won't see me trying to explain why the Civil War had to be fought. I ain't no Southerner. I'm sorry, with a Southern accent. Even when I was growing up, did not history professors here at Texas try to paper that over? Try to make it sound like it just had to happen. Yeah, well, hopefully nobody does that anymore. When I was in high school and we covered Civil War, the teacher came into the class wearing his Confederate Civil War recreation outfit. And then did not like it when I started pointing out the things he was saying were not true. Because even then I had more knowledge than a history teacher. Considerably more knowledge than a history teacher. Oh well. Moving along then. Now, we have another problem. And that problem has to do with what you do when you're afraid an enemy might come along and take away your freedoms. Well, you take away your freedoms first before they can. That's one of the best things. That's what we Americans usually do. As soon as we feel there's an enemy who might be spying on us or conniving and planning our overthrow, we immediately chuck the Bill of Rights right out the window. Well, today we call it the Patriot Act. What do you think I'm talking about? What act on there sounds like, perhaps Charles might be the only person with enough vocabulary to know which phrase up there sounds like it would really take away your freedoms. No, those are two acts. The Alien Act and the Sedition Act are two actions. I want you to know that. I'm just simply making the study guide cover more material by turning two terms into one, because these two terms are very closely related. Alien enemy, what are aliens? Great people. Folks, that's people, we're not supposed to use that word anymore. Yes, people from other countries living in your country who are not citizens in your country are aliens.
You can't say foreigners anymore?
Foreigners is not used that much anymore. No, it's not, is it? Foreigners not used anymore. No one says that anymore.
It's
like, and we don't use the word retarded anymore. We don't use the word retarded. We don't use the word foreigner.
It seems like alien
But
more.
even the DSM-4 that will classify retarded as a...
I know, and these words will show up. Let me put it this way. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Does anyone use the phrase colored anymore?
The NAACP does.
That's because it was founded in 1909. There's no need to change the name, but nobody uses that anymore. Okay. No, sedition. That's the word we're coming to. And many of you didn't realize that because you don't know what the word sedition means. So more vocabulary in just a moment. But Congress has a tradition. First, test the waters by taking away just a little bit of our freedoms and see if we're willing to accept that. If we are, then stage two is grab the whole damn boat or throw the whole person in. All right. And that's what you always do in politics. First you test. The Federalists could see that the American people were worried that we might be at war with France or England at any time. They were much stronger than us. And so we were afraid that there might be French and English spies in America who would then be able to report back home how incredibly weak we were. When you know you're weak, and you know that the enemy would find out how weak you are, then you're more worried. So the Congress, which was controlled by the Federalists, passed the Alien Enemies Act, something that the Democratic Republicans and Thomas Jefferson would have considered an immediate infringement on freedoms and liberties, would have been strongly against. But the average American wouldn't have cared that much because if you were born in this country or a citizen, it didn't apply to you. It only applied to alien nationals. Under the Alien Enemies Act, the government was given the power to arrest alien residents on suspicion of spying without the need of a trial. There'd be no trial, no evidence. If we thought you were a spy, we could arrest you and kick you out of the country.
No habeas corpus.
No habeas corpus, or anything. No Bill of Rights applications whatsoever. And always understand that you should have these same rights when you visit another country as a citizen of that country. And when people visit the United States, they have the same rights, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, some of you may even think that people, foreigners, can't own property in America or own a business. Can they own a business or a property in this country if you're not a citizen of this country?
Yeah, they can. Sure.
Of course you can. And can I go to some country in Europe and buy a business there,
Oh, yeah.
even though I'm not a citizen? And if I'm in that business and somebody sues me, can I represent myself in court even though I'm not a citizen of that country? Otherwise, there's no use owning a business or property, is it? Because if any of you ever get a business, business means lawsuits. Okay? You get a company, you work for a company long enough, that company will be involved in a lawsuit with another company. Basically, that's all American companies ever do nowadays, is sue each other. Relentless lawsuits. Okay. All right, so, with that understanding, this is not very fair and not very important, because the plain fact is, as far as we know, there wasn't a single English or French spy in America we weren't important enough to waste precious spy money on. They were busy spying on each other, not us. Okay. But the opportunity had then opened up, because you now need to be a little bit more subtle in your thinking. It's 1799. I'm on the wrong page. There it is. 1798. And the general election is only 2 years away. And already the Federalists, they put their fingers up in the wind, and they can sense a strong Democratic-Republican vote coming along. The Federalists are pretty sure that they were just lucky to win the election of 1796, and that they are continuing to lose ground, that the United States is becoming a Democratic-Republican country, that the odds of them ever winning a legitimate free election again aren't so good. And so, don't let there be another legitimate free election. You probably think the United States is such a great country, and always has been, that our multi-party system, from the very beginning, we had an election, John Adams won, then 1800 came along, and Thomas Jefferson won, so John Adams just went away, and the Federalist Republicans did nothing about it, because we're just great people, and that's the way democracy operates. No. Certainly not. That is not what happened. In fact, the Federalists did everything they could think of, every dirty trick imaginable, to try to turn the United States into a Federalist dictatorship. It is just human nature. If you are a brand new democracy and you hold your first election and Party A beats Party B, Party A is never going to want Party B to get a second chance to come to power. And true or false, in almost every African and Latin American country that's tried democracy, there's usually one legitimate election, and then after that, it's a kind of one form of dictatorship or not. Yeah, but the same thing happened in the United States. I think the same thing has happened in every democracy. We're going to survive it by the skin of our teeth. Because the primary reason, there is the reason the Federalists told the American people they passed the Sedition Act, because those English and French are planning to overthrow us. Then there's the real reason the Federalists passed the Sedition Act, to make it impossible for the Democrats to win the election, by putting huge restrictions on how much you can criticize the government, making it impossible, but making it illegal for the Democratic Republicans to criticize the government, was the primary goal of the Sedition Act. What does the word sedition mean? What type of a crime is the crime of sedition? And why would the average American probably not know what that word means?
Separation, to overthrowing, to separate.
No. Sedition actually has a very simple word meaning. Sedition is a speech crime. Saying something illegal. In Saudi Arabia, if you criticize Islam or talk about Christianity in public, you will be executed without trial immediately, as has happened. It was about 10 or 20 years ago when an American woman married a Saudi prince. There's a couple dozen of them. She started talking at a party about Christianity. They took her out and cut her head off that next day. I'm sorry, but Islam is the only religion allowed in Saudi Arabia, and if you talk about any religion at all in public outside of that, you will be executed by law. That is their law. Sedition, a religious kind of speech. And in many dictatorships, in a dictatorship, if you criticize the dictator in public, you're committing sedition, aren't you? That's what you would be charged with, a speech crime. Why would most Americans not know what the word sedition means? Because we have apparently free speech in this country. You cannot be accused of sedition. However, I do want you to know that when the United States declares war, the Constitution specifically states that the Bill of Rights no longer applies during wartime. However, when was the last time the United States actually declared war in a country we went to war with?
World War II.
That's right, 1941 was the last time we actually declared war. And when we go to war with the country, the Congress doesn't actually declare war, you can say and do anything you want. Your freedoms still apply. And our undeclared, declared wars of the present.
So many folks
Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan, you may criticize it all you want. We have not declared war on any of those countries, and so it does not apply. Nor had we declared war on France. But what the heck? All right? So the Sedition Act specifically stated... wrong page again. Wow. It made it illegal for anyone in America or any group of people to oppose the government, to ridicule it. What does ridicule mean? Make fun of any member of the government for any reason. You could not criticize John Adams, the Federalist president, or the Federalist majority in the House and the Senate, if you were a newspaper editor and you let an article in that paper criticize the government in any way, you had broken the law, and the government could then take it to court, put you in jail. And symbolically, a half dozen newspaper editors who were Democratic Republican supporters, Thomas Jefferson supporters, who said that in public, criticized the government, were then arrested, convicted in federal court with Federalist judges, and spent time in jail. Once again, realizing that you don't have to arrest everyone who breaks the law, you just publicly arrest a few people, use them as an example, and terrify everyone else. That's what they were hoping. That's not what happened. That's what they were hoping. You see, there are, to this day, many democracies in the third world. Specifically, this usually happens in African countries. Stealing an election by stuffing the ballot with fake votes is the stupidest and least successful way of cheating your way into success. Isn't that almost certain to get caught? When you count up the number of votes, there's more human beings that live in the country. So that is not, there's nothing subtle about that at all. What most of these democracies do in poor African countries, aren't the TV stations and the newspapers actually owned by the government in those countries? And what they do is not let the opposition have any TV commercials. They don't let the opposition on television. They don't let the opposition have anything in newspapers. And so how can the opposition party get their voice to the people? They can't. How often is the government reaching the people with government-owned newspapers and televisions? So the government tells you exactly what to think. You never get to hear from the opposition who wins every election. The government. And do you have to stuff any ballot boxes? You do not. That's what the Sedition Act is trying to do. They're trying to make it impossible for the Democratic Republicans to energize their base and get people angry at the Federalists by telling people, you know, even, can the Democrats, is it legally allowable for the Democrats to exaggerate, or the Republicans to say things that might not really be true about the other side?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, not on the Sedition Act. If you criticize the government anyway, and the Federalists are the government. And so this is designed to hamstring, to tie up the Democratic Republicans so they can't possibly win. Can you figure out how this is going to backfire? How is this going to backfire against the Federalists? I just couldn't hear you. Once again, I couldn't hear that. I suppose so, with any the answer. It's going to irritate the American people to no end. This is the backfire. You pass laws to restrict people's freedoms, and guess what? They're not happy about it. And they vote against you doubly now. Now they're really angry. All across the country, Americans weren't stupid enough to fall for this trick. They figured out why the Federalists passed the Sedition Act. It reinforced their opinion that the Federalists were elitist, undemocratic, dictatorial SOBs who would do anything necessary to stay in power, and encouraged more people to vote for Thomas Jefferson. It exploded in their face. Now, from a modern point of view, which of these two laws does the Patriot Act remind you of? The Alien Enemies Act or the Sedition Act? Maybe nobody knows about the Patriot Act. Does the Patriot Act have to do with really anything to do with American citizens? It's the Alien Enemies Act. The Patriot Act is almost identical to the Alien Enemies Act. Okay, in many ways. But so we did not go past that. But if there were a second 9/11, the Sedition Act would be coming right down the corner, wouldn't it? Right down the pike.
Well, it gave the government authority to, tap a lot of phones and restrict,
And just like the Alien Enemies Act allowed the government to read people's mails and see if you're negotiating with spies and such. So that's the comparison. And very closely related to it. There'll be a Sedition Act passed during World War I as well. Same phrase, Sedition Act. So you'll learn about that in U.S. history too as well. And the World War I Sedition Act did the exact same thing. Made speech against the war illegal. Okay. Excellent. All right. So that leads us to the election of 1800. The election of 1800 is a close replay of the election of 1796, except this time the Federalists lose, the Democratic Republicans win. Yeah, that's pretty good. Now I can make this a little bigger. Sorry. Wow, what did I do? Oh, I pushed that. Sorry. There. All right, and once again, we're dealing with the Electoral College. We don't have the popular vote because the popular vote wasn't counted back then. The counties would just return the results who won. And then whichever candidate won the most counties would win the state. In addition, you can tell that back then, there were states that did not make it winner take all. That Pennsylvania, Thomas Jefferson got 8 delegates, and the Federalists, John Adams, got 7, so that's a wash, isn't it? It's kind of split right down the middle. It kind of helps the way I understand why states have all decided since then to make it winner take all. The Electoral College does not have to be winner take all. This is a federal system. The states get to decide themselves and make their own rules. And they've all decided to make them winner take all because it makes the states more important. In this case, once again, Thomas Jefferson, the Democratic Republicans, no, or in this case, Jeffersonian Republican. I like that. It shows you once again how important Thomas Jefferson was to the origin of the Democratic Republican Party. Knew he was going to win almost every single delegate in the South. In fact, in Virginia, the Virginians were so angry at the Federalists because of the Sedition Act that the Virginians began talking about another very nasty word called nullification. As early as 1800, Southerners are talking about, we only have to stay in America as long as we feel like it. If the federal government passes laws that we do not like, then we have the right to secede from the Union and form our own country. And if John Adams wins the election of 1800, the Virginians were going to launch an armed rebellion against the United States to secede from the Union. This will only be the first of many times. The Southerners are always bitching. Nullification. If you don't pass this law, nullification will secede from the Union if you don't raise the tariff. We'll secede from the Union if you don't change these borders and compromises and agreements. And by the time the South finally secedes from the Union 60 years later, it was in many ways just a relief. They finally decided whether to go get off the toilet or go to the bathroom. Okay, as it were. You understand what I'm trying to say? That by that time, the South seceding from the Union is something people had spent their whole lives hearing about. Not brand new. It's like, finally, we can finally fight it out. Okay, as it were. Nullification. Meanwhile, the Federalists still know they're going to win every single one of the delegates in New England. So basically, whoever wins New York wins the election. New York went for the Democratic Republicans, giving Jefferson a victory, 73 to 65. However, it is better to say this, that everyone knew that 73 of the delegates were Democratic Republican delegates, and only 65 were Federalists, because both parties were still running more than one candidate. But no matter who the 2 or 3 Federalist candidates were, John Adams plus Pinckney, another guy, none of them had won. They'd all lost. What we didn't know was who the Democratic Republican was going to be president. Because Thomas Jefferson had won for president, and when people had voted in the South, Democratic Republican, they had probably thought to themselves, Thomas Jefferson. When people in New York were voting Democratic Republican, they were voting for Aaron Burr. A-A-R-O-N-B-U-R-R, Aaron Burr, the most famous Yankee Democrat-Republican, the most famous Northern Democrat-Republican at the time when all the other Democrat-Republicans were Virginians, like Thomas Jefferson and James Madison and James Monroe. Those are all Virginians and slave owners and plantation owners. Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson both claimed to have won the presidency. So we have another crisis here. In this case, no one's going to be selfless. The only person in America who was more of an egotistical bastard than Thomas Jefferson was Aaron Burr. They both thought they were God's gift to humanity and knew everything. And Aaron Burr knew that Thomas Jefferson was quite unpopular with the Congress for his public statements and strange attitudes on many issues. And so Aaron Burr got on the fastest horse he could in New York City and tried his god-awful best to beat Thomas Jefferson in a race to Washington, D.C., which Thomas Jefferson is guaranteed to win because he's from Virginia. So he gets to Washington first and has a chance to cut a deal with Congress so Congress will name him president instead of Aaron Burr. And Jefferson cut that deal. What Jefferson did is say to the Congress, I know many of you think I'm radical. You've heard many of the crazy things I said when I was younger. I don't mean most of those anymore. I promise to be a moderate, law-abiding president who will obey the Constitution and the letter of the law in every case. And so the Congress picked Jefferson to be our president, and Aaron Burr became a very bitter and very angry man. By the way, while Thomas Jefferson is president, will he be able to obey the letter of the law every single time? No, absolutely not. He will immediately find out that sometimes, for the good of your country, you have to bend the rules a little bit. At least the order of the rules. It'll be a little lesson. If we had followed the letter of the law, we'd have never made the Louisiana Purchase. Never. We did not obey our own Constitution on the Louisiana Purchase. Not in the slightest. We got everything out of order. However, it was of great benefit to the United States, the Louisiana Purchase.
What about Hamilton?
What about Hamilton?
Influencing the outcome.
Alexander Hamilton, who's a Federalist.
He hated Burr.
He hated Burr. Now, I don't know the answer to that, but I will move on that by a few years later, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr are running for governor of New York in 1804, and it gets very bitter, and they both insult each other's character, which requires a duel to restore honor, and that's why Burr and Alexander Hamilton fought that duel in 1804. Because they were both running for governor of New York, and Burr shot Hamilton dead, forcing Burr to drop out of the race as well. He was a murderer. Now, in addition,
Did Hamilton help Jefferson?
No, they're enemies.
Well, he said that in the...
I didn't know that. Okay, now I believe you. However, I do know this. We still don't have the rules for vice president down yet. Who can tell me originally who became the vice president?
One person with the second one.
Yeah, the person with the second most votes. So Aaron Burr became the vice president. Okay. And so the vice president of the United States hates the president's guts and is planning, the first time he gets, to scheme for an overthrow. This is not good for democracy. You don't want the vice president to hate the president. There are countries in the world who have faced that dilemma, where the vice president tries to overthrow the president. It's happened in all parts of the world. So eventually we had to change, I believe it's the 11th Amendment to the Constitution, or the 12th, that has to do with the vice president, that the president of the United States gets to pick his own vice president. But that took a while, decades, to achieve. All right, enough of wasting time over the vice president, who's not important anyway. Okay, however, as you might expect, it's not good to have Aaron Burr, Thomas Jefferson's, one of his greatest enemies. Jefferson's got a lot of enemies. As vice president, 1804, Burr dropped off the ticket and refused to be the vice president for another 4 years. Then he went down to the frontier to try to become king of the West. You separate the western part of the United States and make himself dictator of the West. It didn't work either. Okay, but there you go. We'll move along. We'll get back to Aaron Burr later. And my favorite commercial for peanut butter. The Aaron Burr commercial, where the guy spent his entire life collecting Aaron Burr memorabilia. His life is only Aaron Burr, and he's eating peanut butter, and the phone, he hears on the radio, you know, he ran for successfully president in 1800 for $25,000. He's got peanut butter in his mouth, and he can't say Aaron Burr. I'm sorry, sir, you're wrong. And it's a very funny commercial. Okay. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson is now the President of the United States. His first term, 1800 to 1804, very successful. His second term, a bitter disappointment to him and everyone else, setting a precedent that I don't think many of you have ever heard this before, because, you know, American historians are usually people who love America, right? That's why they picked America as their major. Well, my major is medieval Europe. So, sure, I love America, but I'm willing to say things about it if you want to. For example, here it goes. We have never had a president whose second term was more successful than their first. A. B. We have never had an American president with a successful second term. Ever. Period. Now try to prove me wrong, because that'll prove me right-er. First of all, let's go through. Recently, was George Bush's second term successful? Could you, as a Republican, call his first term successful?
No.
Did he get reelected? Did he even really get elected in 2000?
Not at all.
Did he get reelected in 2004?
Unfortunately.
Well, he must have been successful enough in his first term to get reelected. Was his second term seen by everyone as something of a horrific failure? Was Bill Clinton's second term more successful than his first?
And he got impeached.
And Monica Lewinsky, there you go, let's keep on. What about Ronald Reagan? Was his second term more successful than his first? Charles, we're going to go to you now. No, Ronald Reagan's second term had some problems. Richard Nixon's second term had some big problems. Resignation, okay? Eisenhower's second term, he had a heart attack. Okay, we're going back, huh?
Roosevelt.
Excellent. Franklin Roosevelt, didn't he serve 4 terms?
Yes.
His second term was nowhere near as successful as his first. Court packing, Roosevelt recession of 1937, his second term was a big blow on him. He survived it and got reelected anyway, thanks mostly to Adolf Hitler. Okay, no American president has ever had a successful second term. Why? Answer, I don't know. Doesn't make any sense. A guy does a good job for 4 years, gets reelected, and then every time falls on his face.
The way Congress is set up, though.
Well, it didn't hurt them their first term. It's just something I can't seem to explain. Arrogance? Because now you think you're great, you got a swelled head like the Brady Bunch because you got elected twice. Now you could say it's because they're a lame duck because they can't run a third time. So as soon as you reelect the president, you know that guy won't be president after that. But that doesn't give it, it's just not a good enough answer. I just don't know why that is, but it's true.
People will hold out, though. I mean, like...
Just don't know. I just can't have the answer to that. But we will move ahead now. So let's now talk about why Jefferson's first term was so successful and the successful things he did. As a libertarian, he wanted to restore American simplicity to our government. He wanted to reduce the elitistic, aristocratic formalities of federalist government. He wasn't going to dress like a king, the way George Washington had, or lord over people and restrict their freedoms, like the Sedition Act, or create megalithic, gigantic economic institutions like the Bank of the United States. He thought the Bank of the United States was economic dictatorship. The Sedition Act is social dictatorship. Okay? And so that's when I tell that story about how Jefferson represented himself as the everyday guy at the big party he had where he stole everything, and how he would invite people to breakfast in the White House and he would give those breakfasts in his pajamas. By which I mean wearing about 3 or 4 times as much clothes as you guys are. Maybe just you. The people used to wear, pajamas meant only 2 or 3 layers of clothes instead of the normal 5 or 6 layers. All wool. As cottons had not been introduced yet. So that's the wonderful thing about living in the past. The rich people sweated all the time under their heavy, expensive, cool clothes. Because to be rich meant wore more clothes, and it was hot, hot, hot in those clothes. Meanwhile, the peasants were just walking around in sackcloth, very comfortable. Scratchy flax. Okay, but there you go, relatively comfortable. Yeah, you take a bath in the spring, then you put your clothes on, then next spring you take them off and take another bath. Yes, absolutely for real. You think you take those clothes off? You think people slept in the nude back in the Middle Ages when you're a serf? You don't want to see that. You keep them on all the time. I don't even take their clothes off for intercourse. No. And the church would really frown. The church really frowned on nudity. Yes, absolutely frowned on nudity. And bathing. The church absolutely frowned on bathing because bathing leads to fornication. Adultery. So bathing was right out. Okay. All right. Also, he wanted to no more fancy schmancy floating the debt with bonds and all that crap of Alexander Hamilton. We are just going to balance the budget. We're going to balance the budget. He made a promise to balance the budget. During his 8 years in the White House, the budget deficit went down every year. The budget moved towards being balanced. People respond favorably when you fulfill your promises. It doesn't even necessarily matter what the promise is. If you make a promise as a candidate and you actually fulfill it, it means you're honest and successful. And that is the primary reason one of the primary reasons Jefferson gets reelected. He cut our deficit and moved our country towards a balanced budget. And that is, of course, the responsibility of the Secretary of Treasury. He's the one who is your chief financial officer, and that's why we mentioned Albert Gallatin, who we can also mention because he was an immigrant Swiss banker. He was born in Switzerland. Even many of our highest-ranking secretaries in our government have been people who were born overseas, like Albert Gallatin early in our history, or Henry Kissinger, and even Madeleine Albright, who were secretaries of state in the 20th century. They were also born overseas. Okay. That immigrants have served in our country's government in the most highest levels, of course, except for president, which you can't be born overseas and be president of the United States, but you can reach even up to the highest levels of the department heads. Gallatin introduced a plan to pay off the debt in 16 years, but not by raising taxes. That's not going to make the Democratic Republicans popular. By balancing the budget on the backs of the American taxpayers has never been very popular. In fact, one of the very first things the Democratic Republicans did is get rid of all of the hated internal sales or excise taxes, like the whiskey tax was eliminated. So how is the government going to balance its budget without raising taxes? By substantially cutting costs. Thomas Jefferson, one of our first great massive budget cutters, because he's not a liberal, big government spender. He's a libertarian who believes government is always bad and cutting government is always good. Alexander Hamilton was the big government guy, wasn't he? He always had an idea to increase the size and power of the government. Jefferson is just the opposite. First of all, let's realize that back then, 200 years ago, the federal government was the size of an apple seed. And today it's the size of this room. It spent money on almost nothing. So there are no, I hope you don't any of you think that there were any social welfare programs or anything at all. The only thing the government spent money on was the mails, interstate commerce regulation, and the Army and the Navy. Basically, that's all the government did. So it's going to have to be cut very severely. But there was an opportunity. Jefferson and the Federalists had wanted America to be respected overseas in Europe. And so it wasn't that expensive, but we didn't have much money. We began to open little embassies. An embassy in London, an embassy in Paris, an embassy in Madrid, an embassy in Berlin, where we would put an ambassador, an American diplomat, who could then negotiate with the Europeans like equals. To save money, Jefferson closed every single one of them. We're too small, we're not important, we don't need embassies. That means that when war scares develop, we won't have anyone to negotiate with because we don't have any negotiators. But it does save some money. Jefferson also realized that our 40-ship Navy was too small to defend us in a war, so why have a Navy at all? So basically, he eliminated our Navy entirely, to the point in which we only had several ships, maybe 4 in the entire Navy. We also didn't need an armed forces, so we reduced our Army to below a few thousand men. Our entire Army was like 2,000 officers and 1 very busy private. It's the joke, because the other guys are ordering around the private. Because when you eliminate your armed forces, why should you always keep a cadre of officers, even if you have no privates left? To train in case there's a war. You've got no officers, you'll have no one to train your soldiers, it won't matter. But except for having a cadre of officers, we've got no army, no regiments, no divisions, no ships virtually at all. We're just going to defend ourselves in the Atlantic Ocean. Let's hope it's big enough to protect us. That's his strategy. So now he's really starting to sound like a Democrat. Or the old-fashioned Democrats before the Bushes. Back when Democrats were the doves and Republicans were the hawks. Well, maybe we still are. Now you know why we're going to lose the war with the Barbary pirates. No Navy left to fight it. And once again, what is one of the very first things Jefferson, the military budget cutter, is going to have to do with our armed forces now that he's cut it to the bone? Use it. Letting up a tradition, Democrats first cut the budget, cut the military, then get us into a war. Using the military, we just cut the budget up. That's the way things used to be before the Bushes. Me and Charles are old enough to remember when that was true. It's not really that much true anymore. There's a lot of things that I used to say that were obvious, were truisms in 1990 that aren't truisms anymore in 2010. Oh, there you go. Like, this is the country of opportunity. I'm not sure that's so much true anymore. It was the country of opportunity. Was. Is it anymore? Maybe a few more months. Maybe we got a few more months of opportunity. Better take it, better jump at it if it offers it to you. Okay, but the plain fact is that all that cost cutting, plus one more thing you need to know: economic luck. All successful presidents have been lucky enough to be presidents when the country was doing pretty well, almost all of them. And if the country is suffering economically while you are a leader, you will be blamed. Now, our presidents are economic dictators. Do they really dictate whether our country's going to grow or not? But do we still blame them when things go bad and give them credit when things go well? Yes. If the country turns around and starts growing before 2012, will Obama be re-elected? Absolutely. If the economy is still in the tank, what's going to happen to his re-election tank? No, he's going to lose. It's simple as that. It's nothing to do with race or position. It has everything to do with whether the economy grows or not. And is he responsible for that primarily? No. That's just the way it goes. The country is growing during Jefferson's 4 years in the White House. Our trade with Europe is exploding upwards. When people make more money, do they also pay more taxes? And that means that when the country is growing, people pay more taxes. The taxes go into the government revenue, and the government operates in the black. In the 1990s, was the country growing? Yes. That Bill Clinton benefited from that and was able to balance the budget, wasn't he? Did he also raise taxes a little bit? Yes. Did he also cut spending a little bit? Yes. And he was lucky enough that the economy was growing, he cut spending, increased taxes, and the country was growing, so our budget actually balanced.
You had a huge surplus.
We had a huge surplus for a couple of years. Yeah. Then the economy turned down, 9/11, we started spending more on everything, we cut taxes, spent more, and the economy declined, and next thing you know, we're in a huge recession. Okay. So those are all the reasons why Jefferson benefited and is popular. But there was one overwhelming thing, and I think I have just enough time to cover it in class. The 10 minutes it takes to cover the Louisiana Purchase will keep me from spending too much time on this. The great achievement of Thomas Jefferson's first term, the achievement that both greatly benefited the country for generations to come and helped him politically get reelected, the purchase of the entire West from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. A peaceful addition to the United States that nearly doubled the size of our country. Obviously, the American people are going to be very pleased with this purchase. And so now I need to talk about how we were able to buy such a large piece of land for France for such a small amount of money. Why did the French sell it to us? What are the French doing with that piece of land in the first place? It's all worth talking about. Oh, well, that was a rhetorical question. Somebody knows the answer? No, France had it. I'll just explain it. No, they weren't losing anything. But the last time we looked, France didn't have any territory in North America anymore when they lost the French Indians War. The English caused them to give up all the territory. Now the French have all this back. The French are back in control of New Orleans. Yes, they are. So let me explain it nice and quickly. I think I'll just sit down. That way it'll save me time. All I need to know is the amount of money we spent. That's the thing I always forget. Where is it? $15 million. That's all I need to know. $15 million is an awful lot for 1.5 million square miles. That's pennies on the acre. Now this table's broken. Oh, wait a minute. There. You thought I wouldn't be able to do that. That's what happens when you connect tables with one nail. If there were two nails, would that have been this is scientifically impossible? And yet, why did I break my knee? I've been working here for 20 years. I know they only attach these things with one nail. These are government employees. Okay. All right. What are the French doing with that land? Well, Napoleon has now made himself the Emperor of France and begun a war to conquer all the kings of Europe and force everyone to be free. Force democracy on the world by conquering the kings and force these countries to become democracies like France. Which wasn't a democracy, but there you go. One of the countries that got conquered by the French was Spain. Spain's been conquered by France. The King of Spain is now Napoleon's brother. Okay? And now Spain is ruled by France. The Spanish give France back Louisiana Territory, New Orleans and the great interior. Okay? Why does Napoleon want that land? Because he has dreams of an empire in America based on the still profitable French colony of Haiti, where Haitian slaves are worked to death to produce huge fortunes on sugar plantations. But something happened in 1801. The people of Haiti rose up in rebellion against the French, and in a revolution became the first black African Republic of North America, the Republic of Haiti. The black people, independent country, a black republic in North America, the Republic of Haiti. Now that the French have been defeated in Haiti, Napoleon has no further interest in North America. Now that he's lost Haiti, that was supposed to be, Louisiana would be the breadbasket to feed the slaves of Haiti, who have now freed themselves. And so there's no need for the breadbasket. Napoleon has no interest in Louisiana at all anymore. Now we in America don't know that. Thomas Jefferson doesn't know that much about what's going on in the world. All he knows is that we could really use some coastline on the Gulf of Mexico. And so he sends a group of negotiators to offer $5 or $10 million for New Orleans. That's what our diplomats were authorized to offer a certain amount of money to buy New Orleans. And the chief negotiator was James Madison, who will be our next president. Now immediately we find two things happen. We experience unexpected good luck, and if we want to accept that good luck, we're going to have to sidestep the Constitution. Or we can obey the letter of the law and lose a lucky chance. Because when our negotiators, now we don't have to ask who's running France anymore, Napoleon is. Everybody knows where he lives. So we go to Napoleon, and immediately he's in a massively good mood. Because he has just declared war on every king of Europe in 1803, and he needs a quick infusion of cash. He's looking for something to sell to get some money to pay for his wars. We Americans showed up at just the right time. And he says, what? Sell you New Orleans? I will sell you the entire Louisiana Territory, 1.5 million square miles, including vast areas of land that no American has ever even seen, much less knows about. And about $15 million. It's a real low-ball offer. So low-ball that immediately Madison must think to himself, if I give Napoleon any time to think about this, he's going to realize that we pay more. We'd pay more. We would pay a lot more than that. This is a real good deal. The problem is that James Madison is not authorized to sign treaties for the United States. Only the Senate can do that. He's supposed to get on a very slow ship back to America, tell the Senate and the President, then they negotiate and argue for months, vote on it, yes or maybe even no, which would really piss Napoleon off. And by the time we say yes, maybe Napoleon has come to his senses and demanded more. So Madison just said yes. And then got on his ship as soon as possible to tell Thomas Jefferson that A, we had just purchased for an incredibly low price of the Louisiana Purchase, as long as B, he was willing to send the money immediately without asking the Senate first. And that is what Jefferson did. He immediately sent the money to Napoleon. Then after it was a fait accompli, F-A-I-T-A-C, accompli. Okay, which means already happened. After we already agreed to the treaty and then sent the French the money, then the President went to the Senate for authorization. And the Senate said, okay. Well, what could the Senate do? We'd already sent the money. Well, there you go. When something is really popular, you don't really have to worry about the law or democracy, do you? Was anybody really going to scream and yell at Jefferson for doubling the size of our country peacefully? Give me 2 or 3 more minutes and class isn't over. In addition, if a group of people in this country are really hated and experiencing massive prejudice, and the prejudice is popular with the majority, what happens? The prejudice continues. And we can disobey our democracy and our laws. If 75% of people hate a group, you're not going to get justice now, are you? If you try to give them justice, the majority is going to vote you out of office. Okay, all right. So when we do not obey the law with the Indians and take all their land, I don't think anyone was very upset, not in the slightest. All right. All right. So that leaves us with the last piece of information for today: a overwhelming sweep of victory in 1804. Thomas Jefferson has been very successful his first term. The budget is moving towards balance. We've doubled the size of the United States peacefully. We haven't been in a war. And so he gets reelected overwhelmingly. 162 electors for Jefferson, 14 electors for the Federalists, who even lose Massachusetts. Why? The Federalist Party is already halfway in the grave. And when we come back to class next week, we'll put him in the grave entirely. Well, next week, I mean Thursday, don't I? Good. Your class on Thursday. So Thursday, we will try in a single class to do the entirety of essay question number 4, which has the most information. Number 4 is the essay question for this test with the most information associated with it. And I will try to get through the entirety of the causes, at least. I'm going to try to make it through the entire war in one class. I will try my best to make it through the entire war in one lecture. I'll talk about that on Thursday.